Hey, how's it going guys? Zero Creation here, back for another video. Today I will be talking about Netero versus the Royal Guards. Now I'm doing solo 1v1 battles because Netero could not handle all of them at once, obviously. In the Chimera Ant arc, the Ant Queen came from the Dark Continent and started feeding on humans and animals to create children. Eventually, she made the Royal Guards, Pitou, Pouf, and Youpi, who would protect the King Meruem. The Hunter Association chairman, Netero, originally fought with Meruem and lost, so today I wanted to discuss him versus the guards instead. Now for the people who think that Netero is less than Pitou because he said so before they raided the castle, I have a few ways to disprove that. Considering that you can't judge how powerful a person is in a fight just by looking, Netero is most likely looking at raw aura, which I would agree with, since the Royal Guards have near infinite aura, it seems. Also, we know that Netero had not warmed up yet, or charged Zero Hand, plus he likes to be humble as we have seen. I would also like to point out that even when Pitou went for the attack when they confronted each other, Netero went to attack casually, with him using the Guanyin Bodhisattva. She had to compress her perception of time infinitely and is still barely able to keep up with Netero. He then proceeds to slap her away and then fight Meruem. Now, his fight with Meruem is short but is the only indication of his power, so we need to analyze how good he did and how he would stack up comparably. Using his first hand, he is able to make Meruem spit up blood, but as we know, he was not fully guarded. Netero then tells Meruem he will tell him his name as long as Meruem defeated him, and Meruem compares this to a chess match without a rook or a bishop. So we clearly know that Meruem was holding back, but we also know that he was going for a complete fight. Even though he wasn't going for the kill, he still needed to be able to hurt Netero, even if he couldn't just one-shot him, which he might be able to do, considering he was able to severely injure him by taking off his arm and leg casually. Netero then uses the third hand and Meruem fights it off easily, and then they proceed to have their legendary fight. In the fight, Netero uses the 99th hand, and by the end of his attack, Meruem is seen with only scratches and maybe some slight bruises, but is relatively fine, while Meruem took one of Netero's arms and leg. Netero then uses his zero hand and heavily damages Meruem, with him having blood, bruises, and tears in his skin everywhere, with Meruem calling this a superb technique. Now, how would someone like Pitou fare against a Netero who is warmed up? Simply put, I think Netero would be able to beat her. Now, for the people in the back groaning and rolling their eyes, I completely understand, and I will explain why that is the case. But first, we need to discuss Gon versus Pitou. Now, if we take only the manga in consideration, we know that Pitou, without even seeing adult Gon, thought he would be a threat to the king. And then she gets pretty much one-shot by this vaguely Meruem level character for the people saying that she took his arm, and that is a factor, but I would like to tell you that it really isn't a factor whatsoever if you think about it. We know that due to her will, she was able to activate an ability and was strengthened by Nen after death. A phenomenon that makes Nen stronger after death because of the willpower of the user. Meaning, not only was she buffed post-death when she took his arm, but also the fact that Gon was off guard. So if Pitou, when she was alive, couldn't even touch Gon, who was vaguely Meruem level, why wouldn't Netero be able to fight her when even before Zero Hand was able to actually damage Meruem, even if slightly? We also need to consider the fact that Meruem could barely keep up with the Netero's speed, and was only able to get his leg and arm because of his foresight by playing Gungi with Komoki, and losing so much he actually gained foresight, which the royals do not have. So not only are the ants much slower than Meruem, who's barely able to keep up, but they also lack the ability to plan ahead, with the exception of Pouf. But before I give Pitou the L, I would like to explain why her abilities would not help that much. Her first ability, Dr. Blythe, needs time and stillness to activate, which Netero surely isn't going to give her mid-fight, so she can heal. Her next ability, puppeteering, is also a non-factor since in a 1v1 she won't be able to puppeteer anyone. Now her last ability, Terpsichore, is the most troublesome since it is able to seemingly boost physical stats and might help her fight better, but in the end we don't really know since we only got to see it towards the end of her life. Even though it is a combat Nen ability, it has no special conditions or anything and is just a physical boost, so it's seen as extremely weak since the more conditions, the stronger the ability, so although it gives a boost, it shouldn't be too big since Gon still slapped her casually. One more thing about Pitou is that Terpsichore, according to chapter 264, it takes 0.1 seconds to activate, and she is then surprised and shocked at the fact that before she could even activate it, he was able to say an entire sentence and also activate his ability and attacks her before she was even able to activate it. This means that if he attacked before she even activated his ability and then proceeded to go through his hands, he would most likely kill her since he could slightly injure Meruem, whereas she could not even get close to someone maybe as strong as Meruem. And if all fails, he would definitely kill her with zero hand. Now, let's move on to Youpi. Basically, Youpi is a meathead and has very little strategy and relies heavily on his instincts, and even his Nen abilities are fighting based with no support ones. This is probably due to the fact that he was made solely of animals while the other two royal guards had human in them. His first ability, Metamorphosis, allows him to freely manipulate his body and add new parts and even increase the size and strength of other parts. His second ability, Rage Blast, which is an ability that charges up and he expands and then blows up, but then shortly returns to his normal body. But he was extremely vulnerable during the charge up, and which can allow for attacks, but this can also be used to lure and fake out opponents. His last ability, Rage Incarnate, is the most tricky. It increases his speed by turning him into a centaur-like form and gives his right arm a scythe and his left arm a sac to store his rage while making him stronger, and he's also able to keep Metamorphosis. This is basically Rage Incarnate and Metamorphosis, but better since it removes the vulnerable weakness of Rage Blast and makes him faster as well. Also, according to Knuckle, he has around 10 times more Nen than Moro. This fight would be interesting, but if Youpi does not pull out Rage Incarnate immediately, he will get slapped by Netero due to his immense speed, and it would look like how he fought with Killua. But Netero does a lot more damage and is a lot more fast, and he's a better strategist. Although if Youpi lands one hit, which I doubt he would, Netero would die, since Youpi has the greatest physical strength of the royal guards. Pouf is the final guard, and is the weirdest one since he thought of his abilities unlike the others. He's a good strategist, but is not one even close to Meruem, and is probably worse than Netero since Netero has over a century of combat training. His first ability, Cocoon, is a support ability that takes time and needs prep and people, so it is a non-factor. His second ability, Spiritual Message, is actually a bit troublesome since his scales come off and move through the air, and when in contact with others, Nen allows him to formulate conjectures about people's mind and thoughts so he can strategize. This doesn't mean mind reading exactly, but basically he can read people and make very good assumptions through Nen flow. He is also able to hypnotize people, but it only works well against normal people and would most likely have no effect against Netero. His third ability, Body Reconstruction, just allows him to reconstruct his body to look like other people, so it won't really help in an actual fight. His last ability, Beelzebub, which allows him to create clones by splitting himself and controlling his cells, and the more he makes, the weaker they are, and when smaller than a fly, they lose eyesight. He is able to control them telepathically, and when split up, they were so weak, even Killua was able to burn them with his lightning easily, meaning Netero would easily defeat them. Also, when he puts his cells back together, he is damaged if a cell took damage. So if he destroyed enough clones, he would actually hurt him. I honestly see this as an easy fight, but if Pouf stalls for too long, Netero would lose in a battle of attrition since Pouf has near infinite aura. He is weaker and slower than the other two royals and only has strategy, but he is worse than Meruem at it, who had foresight which Netero could almost handle, with Meruem saying that Netero's combos were near infinite and extremely hard to read. To conclude, The Royal Guard gets shitted on with their lack of speed, mastery, control, strategy, and their abilities being a bad matchup for Netero. And if all fails, he can always use Zero Hand and instantly erase him due to the fact that even Meruem got heavily damaged. And the other Royal Guards are way weaker than Meruem, so they would most likely get near death, if not be on death's door, the minute he uses it. And they would eventually die due to injuries, either way. If you disagree, leave a comment explaining why and I will respond to them. Anyways, thanks for watching and have a nice day.